Hello and welcome everyone, it is me, Silver, also known as the Power to Tool, is back for you with another video after a short trip. On that trip, a new Monarch card was announced, as I've kind of, said on Twitter before, and also in a community post kind of talking about that card. I wanted to share some theory that card I think implicates for the deck in the future, and that is blind seconding. In general, let's quickly talk about the list, talk about a couple card choices that I made and maybe a couple options. This is mainly theory, but I think the deck list as a whole should probably hold up quite well. We are of course starting with 3 copies of the new guy. We are starting with 3 copies of Thessalos, the Shadow Firestorm Monarch. 3000 attack, 1000 defense, and a level 10 pyro. You can tribute this guy by tributing a monster your opponent controls and a tribute summoned monster you control. And if this guy's tribute summoned, you can banish a random card from your opponent's hand. And if you do, you burn your opponent for 1000. And if this was tribute summoned by tributing a tribute summoned level 8 or higher monster, you can also apply this effect. You can banish a card on the field. And then if it was a fire or dark monster card, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original level times 200. This is kind of I'd assume a new lineup of Monarchs we will be getting in future sets, following Dune in fusions between 2 of the original Monarchs. This being a fusion of Thessalos and Caius, from the banishing and burn effects, and also from the shadow part of the name. Really cool card. I'm still a bit iffy if this is really a 3-off. This is currently a 3-off because I do believe you want to hard draw this. But the problem is, unless you find your way to a Mithra, you're not summoning this instantly. So you could maybe definitely cut this down to 2 and then get an additional space and for a sweeper like Harpy's Feather Duster, since you are aiming to go second with this deck. And you do already have quite a couple ways of, monster removal in this deck. Then we have, I think standard ratios by now. 3 copies of Erebus, the Underworld Monarch. If this is tribute summon, you can tribute summon this by tributing a tribute summon monster. And if this is tribute summon, you can send 2 Monarch spells and traps with different imps from your hand or deck to the graveyard. And if you do, you shuffle a card from your opponent's hand at random from the graveyard or the side of the field into the deck. And non-targeting, by the way, which is very nice. And then also once per turn during either player's main phase, if this is in your graveyard, you can discard a Monarch spell trap and then target a monster in your graveyard with 2400 or more attack and 1000 defense to add it to your hand. Another thing to maybe mention here is that you could potentially, of course, if you get, Erebus and Big Thessalos into the graveyard, via something like Foolish Burial, you could use the Erebus to retrieve the Thessalos. Otherwise, Thessalos currently doesn't have a lot of ways to get access in the deck, which is a main issue. But I do hope / believe that Konami will fix this. Surely, right? 3 copies of Ether, similar to Erebus, can also tribute this by tributing a tribute summoned monster. And if this is tribute summoned, you send 2 Monarch spell traps with different names from hand or deck to grave. And if you do, you special summon a monster with 2400 or more attack and 1000 defense from your deck. Funnily enough, this can summon, the new Thessalos, which is very nice. Can, maybe help you push for games if you are able to simplify your game state going second. But the monster gets returned during the end phase. You don't mind that as much, because if you're having, Thessalos in hand and still get to, keep an Ether on the board, you can, just slap down the Thessalos on, another follow-up turn, which is pretty nice. And the second effect of Ether is that during your opponent's main phase and this card's in your hand, you can banish a Monarch spell trap from your graveyard, and immediately after this effect resolves, tribute summon this card. This is a quick effect. 2016 PSCT, oh boy. But yeah, Ether's great, maxing out on her. So that is, I think, understandable. For the going second portion, we're playing a copy of Dino Wrestler Pancratops, get free body, that can also quick effect tribute itself and then target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. Usually trades 2 for 2 since you're able to run over something with the 2600, and if not, you're still outing a back row or some other thing. Pancratops just a pretty crazy card, especially if you're looking to go second. Then we have 2 copies of Santa Claus in here. This is a Kaiju. You can special summon this from your hand to your opponent's field in defense by tributing 1 monster they control, and if summoned this way during the end phase, your opponent draws a card. Most cases you will be looking to out this. The big question that probably a lot of you guys are asking now, why are we playing Santa Claus and not actual Kaijus? Two reasons, actually. Santa Claus, on the one hand, has the advantage of not being limited to one per field. So you could technically, if you open to Santa Claus, 2 things. But also because Santa Claus is a 1 tribute monster. And I know this is probably, you know, talking about the nichest of niche scenarios, but I do believe Monarch is a deck that gets a lot of value out of making these decisions in deck building. You could technically special summon one of your tribute fodders, tribute a Santa Claus over it, and trigger a return to, you know, add an ether for a follow-up turn, or maybe even turn a domain live that way. But I think the main thing I'm concerned about here is, you know, having something you can tribute summon, trigger a return, and then grab like an ether, an Erebus, or maybe even a Thessalos if you still have like a tribute summon open. For the rest of the deck, we are playing a bit of tribute material, 3 copies of Linkslayer here, a special summonable body if you don't control any monsters, and also once per turn you can discard up to 2 cards and then target that many spell traps on the field and destroy them. A very nice effect. You do have a bit of graveyard synergy in this deck, so the discard doesn't hurt you as much, but having, you know, some main deck back row hate is pretty nice, especially if you're like me and currently don't have like a form of back row hate in the main deck. Although like Evenly Matched kind of gets that done. Then we have a three copies of Mithra, the Thunder Vessel. If this is in your hand, you can special summon it. But you can special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. Also, if you special summon this card. Then you can special summon a Vassal token with essentially the same stat line as Mithra, but 1 star less. To your opponent's field and defense, funnily enough, a secret win con against Kashtira if you're going first. And if this is tributed for a tribute summon, you can activate this effect, and then you can tribute summon a monster in your main phase this turn in addition to your normal summon or set, which is pretty nice. Helps you, you know, maybe climb into big Thessalos, or like just get an additional big Monarch onto the board to maybe help OTK. Playing 2 copies of Pot of Desires. I honestly like the idea behind this. I believe this is far from mandatory, but I think the deck gets a lot out of like drawing just an additional card, since the deck is still inherently very bricky. We are still talking about a Monarch list after all. For the spell traps, we are running, I guess, well-known shit by now. 3 copies of Domain of the True Monarchs. If you have no cards in your extra deck and you're the only player to control a tribute summon monster, your opponent cannot special summon monster from the extra deck. Yeah, I think we know that part by now. If you tribute summon, you know, a tribute summon monster you control, attacks an opponent's monster, gains 800 during damage calc, and also once per turn you can reduce the level of a monster with 2800 attack and 1000 defense in your hand by 2 until the end of this turn. That's like an insanely helpful effect, especially if you just open like one of these tribute dudes and a Monarch. Since you're able to, you know, get like an Erebus and Ether onto the board and maybe establish a domain lock that way. Playing a Terraforming to grab this very important card for the deck. 3 copies of Pantheism, one of the greatest consistency spells for a deck ever devised. This is essentially like a mini Graceful Charity if you activate it. Since it discards sends a Monarch spell trap from your hand to the graveyard and draws 2 cards. But you can also banish this card from your graveyard, reveal 3 Monarch spell traps from your deck, and your opponent chooses one of those to add to your hand. Second effect, graveyard effect of Pantheism being limited to 1 per turn. Pretty crazy card. This coming back to 3 made a lot of people, you know, kind of fear that Monarch was coming back, but it really didn't do a whole lot. Then we have 3 copies of Tenacity. Straightforward effect, reveals a monster with 2400 or 2800 attack and 1000 defense in your hand, essentially your Monarchs, except, funnily enough, Thessalos, because he has 3000 attack, to add a Monarch spell trap from your deck to your hand. Pretty good card, gets you, you know, targeted to any spell trap you want at that point. 3 Stormforth, once per turn. During this turn, if you would tribute summon a monster, you can also tribute a monster your opponent controls, even though you do not control it, but the turn you activate Stormforth, you are locked out of the extra deck. Pretty sick card, helps this deck immensely going second at breaking boards. Also, funnily enough, poses a disruption if you have this going first, as you contribute the monster for the Ether summon. So yeah, Stormforth's pretty crazy, and probably like one of the reasons why I do believe, you know, there's a good niche for like blind second Monarch. Then we have 3 copies of Return. You can special summon monster from the extra deck while this is face up, and if you tribute summon a monster, you can activate one of these effects. Essentially, both add you a monster with, you know, Monarch stat line from your deck to your hand, except the new Thessalos. Somebody at Konami really didn't future-proof these, but yeah, you're either adding a monster with 2400 or 2800 attack and 1000 defense, but a different name from the one you tribute summoned from your deck to your hand. One Change of Heart. I think this, funnily enough, is one of the better decks to make use of Change of Heart, because Monarch gets a lot out of, you know, just yoinking a body and then maybe tributing that off. You know, it's very 2001, but I do believe Change of Heart is in a very good position in this deck, especially if you are looking to blind second. Closing off the main deck are 3 copies of Evenly Matched, one of the best board breakers you could be playing this format, but I think the board breakers you will be running in this deck are more up to, you know, your personal preference, your personal meta game, and what you will be facing if you actually decide to, you know, take this deck anywhere. In the side deck, we have some going first tools. We have 4 cards that I do not talk about on the channel, but they're here so that maybe at one point I don't get comments about them, because I think these 4 turn like an already very boring deck into an even more boring deck, but that is my personal opinion. So like, run these if you're going first and you want to run these. These win you games, so play them. Well, you can play like an Ether Garnet. I didn't find the space for it, or like rather quickly decided to cut it. You could of course main deck this, but I think you don't really need it, because in most cases you're just looking to like go second, simplify the board state, slap a big guy onto the field, maybe establish a domain lock, and kind of just win out in a simplified game state. On, you know, tribute summon big dude with removal effect, which I think is the main appeal to Monarch, that you just have like these very powerful dudes that have good effects if they are tribute summoned. For like additional sweepers, Happy's Feather Duster is mentioned if you want to main deck this, maybe like, I don't know, cut the Change of Heart if you feel like the deck already tributes enough of your opponent's stuff, or like one of the third Thestalos. I think that's also like a valid thing to cut, if you really want to like main deck additional back row hate. 3 Lightning Storm, not as great this format, from what I have heard from people, but like still a decent sweeper you could like play if it like suits your local meta game or whatever you find yourself into. Same story with Dark Ruler no more, and the Solemn Judgment is here for going first. But in general, I do believe there's like a very interesting bit of theory behind this, especially with, you know, the direction that new Thestalos is taking, assuming that, you know, future kind of Giga, Omega, big Chungus Monarchs keep this kind of, you know, pacing that, you know, you can tribute summon them by tributing a monster your opponent controls and a tribute summon monster you control. I just like a good way to search these. But this deck could generally, you know, really do with a way of, you know, searching the big boys. So that's like a general thing. In case you were curious for like, you know, flex slots in this list, I'd probably say you can definitely like shave the Pancratops if it doesn't suit you. You can shave the Santa Claus if they don't suit you. Desires, as mentioned, I really like it because the deck does get a good bit out of an additional cards. But you could probably also like shave the Desires and be like perfectly fine. You are going second, so you do have a 6th card to go with, which is very nice. Change of Heart I believe is good in this deck, but you can also, you know, replace that with like a different board breaker depending on your format, and the same story goes with Evenly Matched. As mentioned, you could go with 2 Thestalos, but I think if you're going with 2 Thestalos, I would advise on running Pot of Desire, so that's also something you can cut. And that way you essentially have 10 slots you can fill with whatever board breakers you would like for your current format. So there's definitely a lot of space to work with. You can probably also like put Nibiru's into this deck. That's also like a pretty good hand trap to have. As it's usually putting decks into a space where they either, you know, hard lose to it because they have to play into it, or it just like gets them off of like, you know, getting to a really big board because of just how impactful the card is. So that is maybe also something you could consider for this. But with, you know, all that out of the way, I would like to hear your thoughts on this down in the questions below. I know there's like a couple, you know, people that do really like Monarchs in my community. So, you know, maybe you guys can give me your thoughts in the comments below as, you know, fellow Monarch players. But I think generally thoughts on this are really appreciated, because I think this could be like a fairly interesting direction to take the deck in once we like even, you know, maybe get some more of these guys, and potentially even, you know, new Monarch cards that maybe specifically support these. But yeah, with that out of the way, I will thank you guys very much for watching and see you guys again next time. But until then, goodbye.